Better thinking, faster decisions, bigger ROI. This is the Finding 12 Minutes podcast. The idea is simple. If you can find 12 minutes of efficiency in your day, you will gain an hour every week, and that changes how we work. Each episode is focused on practical ways to use AI, technology, and smarter strategies to help you move faster, think clearer, and get more done with less effort. So let's find your 12 minutes. Welcome back to the Finding 12 Minutes podcast. This week, I want to talk about something that sounds incredibly important, and I think everyone agrees that this matters, but it feels like most don't actually do any of this consistently. And this is really strategic planning, but strategic planning from an innovation perspective. I know that most firms and most companies have their strategic planning and their planning sessions at the end of the year to kind of tee up the previous year or the next year, review last year, look at next year. But how many firms out there are actually focusing on just innovation planning? I recently shared an Innovation Strategic Planning Workbook on my Substack. And what stood out to me afterwards is how many people said that the version, some version of the same thing. We need this. We've talked about this. It's not because we lack any ideas. It's not because we can't figure out what technology we want to use. There's not even a lack of ambition. It's because most organizations are operating almost entirely in reaction mode. How did this year go? How we anticipate next year is going to go? And we get into the same core metrics. We always measure the same things. We don't think about innovation and the impacts to innovation. Ultimately, everyone is busy. We're all overloaded. We're chasing tools and trends. AI has not helped this at all. But then you have to focus on things like customer demand, internal politics, deadlines, revenue, just all of it. And eventually innovation becomes a random activity instead of an intentional strategy. And that's the problem we want to try to unpack today. So most organizations treat innovation as a side quest. It's something people discuss during offsite meetings. You discuss it once a year. It's something that shows up in PowerPoints. It's something that leaders say that they care about. But there's rarely an actual operational framework behind it. And honestly, I understand why. Strategic planning is difficult because it forces uncomfortable conversations. What are we prioritizing? What are we not prioritizing? What problems are we actually trying to solve for? Does technology even matter? What's the noise? Where are we willing to invest? Who owns it? How do we measure success? Where's the ROI? That level of clarity is hard. And it gets even harder when you start incorporating investments in terms of long-term investments, something that may not actually create any return for more than a year or more. So it's easier for us just to stay busy and focus on the metrics and the things that we know we can measure and aren't hard. And I think a lot of organizations kind of confuse this concept of motion with progress. They're testing tools, they're attending conferences, they're experimenting with pilots. But none of that's really connected to actual strategy. It's not innovation planning. It's experimentation without direction. So the real cost of not planning, and that's the dangerous part, is the absence of planning that still creates outcomes. We still spend the money. We're still buying tools. It's still consuming a lot of our time. We create a ton of technical debt. We create confusion. I call this innovation debt. I think technical debt is something that others have used before that I've heard. But it happens when organizations continually layer these disconnected decisions without any alignment. One department buys a tool, another team buys something else, operations doing one thing, marketing's doing another. Leadership thinks everyone is aligned, but nobody's actually working on the same roadmap. And eventually you end up with duplicated efforts, even duplicated functions and features within similar applications, fragmented systems, inconsistent adoption, poor utilization. And ultimately, if you're thinking about back to the board or leadership, there's really unclear ROI. The irony is most of this doesn't happen because organizations are reckless. It happens because they have slowed down enough they haven't slowed down enough to strategically plan. So why do I use a workbook? I guess it's that consulting mindset that I have. It's the way I process things. But it's really why I built this Innovation Strategic Planning Workbook is because most organizations need more theory. They don't really need more theory. What they really need is that they need structure, right? They need the ability to kind of get through all the ideas that they have, and the workbook forces teams to think through innovation operationally. It's not emotionally, it's not reactively, it's operationally. So what problems are we solving? I think that's the primary thing that we need to focus on with any workshop or any workbook, internal or external, is that we focus the problem statement. And then it really goes to, why does this matter? What is the business impact? What is the level of effort? What's the implementation risk? What's the implementation risk? What's the risk to not implementing this? Who owns this? Where are the dependencies? And then ultimately you want to kind of end up with something like, what does success actually look like? Those conversations matter more than the technology itself. It could be any technology, it could be any process. The one thing I've learned over the years is this: most innovation problems are not technology problems. They're prioritization problems, sometimes communication problems, definitely ownership problems. And ultimately, what impacts most of the organization is alignment problem. And so the workbook I designed is really to create that organizational clarity, because clarity accelerates execution. And I think it's that same thing when you think about like sports and you go back to these analogies, right? They say smooth is fast, right? That's what you want. In this instance, it's clarity accelerates execution. So the smooth part, right? Going slower and being deliberate and doing those things helps accelerate those executions. And this type of workshop is something that actually helps do that. So connecting this to the AI and even product strategy, it becomes even more important right now because of AI, in my opinion. Everyone feels the pressure to do something with AI. Most organizations still haven't answered the basic strategic questions about it. You know, questions like, why are we implementing AI? What problem are we trying to solve with AI? What value does AI actually create for the organization? What workflows matter the most? What metrics should we improve? What's the adoption strategy? What challenges do we have operationally? And I think you think about the adoption and operations, I think they kind of go hand in hand. Without those answers, AI and even your product strategy, if you have applications that you're pushing through your organization, they just become another disconnected initiative. And I think we're entering a phase where organizations need to stop treating AI as experimentation and start treating it like it's operational infrastructure. That requires planning. The same thing applies to product strategy. A lot of companies think product strategy means future planning. I don't think it does. Real product strategy is prioritization, it's market alignment, operational feasibility, understanding pain, customer pain identification, adoption planning, both internally and from your customer's perspective. And then long-term positioning. Again, this all falls back to this concept of you need to have structure in place in order to achieve these things. Organizations that win don't necessarily have the ones that have the best ideas. It's usually the organizations that win in this are the ones that have the clearest path to execution. It's that structure, it's the strategy, it's the clarity that helps them win versus the ideas. So if we think about the bigger message, and honestly, this connects directly back to that entire concept that I have of finding 12 minutes. The whole point of finding 12 minutes is to find small operational improvements that compound over time. But those improvements do not happen accidentally. They happen intentionally. Organizations don't become more innovative by hoping that innovation appears. They become innovative by creating systems that support innovation consistently. And that requires planning, prioritization, accountability, measurement, operational discipline. Innovation sounds creative, but successful innovation is actually operational. And that's the part I think most people miss. So closing this up. So if there was one thing I want you to take away from this episode, it's this: innovation without structure creates noise. Strategic planning creates momentum. You do not need to solve everything at once. And I tell people this all the time. If you have 10 steps in your process, it's the one step that causes the most friction I want you to focus on, then the next, then the next, then the next. You don't have to change everything at once. You do not need massive transformation overnight. But what you do need is clarity. And you need clarity around what matters, what gets prioritized, what gets measured, and who owns that execution. It's one of the main reasons why I use my Innovation Strategic Planning Workbook, because it creates that structure. It allows us to kind of systematically move through our thought process, our ideas, and move to accountability. And I love using the phrase, how do we get from conversations to actions to accountability? It's not about creating more meetings. It's all about creating alignment, because alignment reduces the wasted effort. Alignment improves adoption. Alignment improves the ROI. And ultimately, alignment helps organizations move from discussion to decision. And honestly, most organizations are stuck in the decision mode right now. That's all I have for this episode of Finding 12 Minutes. Remember, Finding 12 Minutes is not really necessarily about finding time. It's about creating enough operational clarity and efficiency to focus on the work that really matters. I'll see you next week. And that's your 12 minutes. If you found value in this, share it with someone who needs to work smarter, not harder. And remember, small efficiencies compound. Find 12 minutes a day and the results take care of themselves. I'll see you in the next episode.